Evening, everybody. Got a Bible with you. Open to Job, chapter 2. Otherwise, have someone bring a Bible to you. We've got them scattered about here. And before we go there, I've actually put a PowerPoint together with 5 things that you just need to know that might be helpful. I hope they're helpful. As we started looking at this, go to the next slide, the suffering topic is huge and complicated, and it's actually kind of a bummer until you get to the bottom and start to get through it and kind of see what God does with it. So I'm just going to lay this out, especially for confirmation kids writing notes. Here's 5 things you can fill your page with and then hand it in and you're done. Awesome, huh? You just, however you want to do it, 1 through 5. Suffering.
Figure it out, that's part of the suffering.
Yes. A young Pharisee in the crowd here. Okay, suffering is a powerful tool when placed in the hand of God. It's a tool. Best used by God. Okay? Next slide. Got it, guys? Got it. Oh, they need to write that down. Suffering can help us see where we are on God's map. So back up one, Jake. Got that one? Okay? Still writing? Well, working with your neighbors. Suffering is God's tool. Can be God's tool. Okay? Next one. Suffering tells you where you're at on God's map. Helps us to see where we're at. Okay? These will come up again during the sermon. So if you just get 1 through 5 and then you fill these in. Here or not. Okay? Third one. Suffering can drive us closer to God. Fourth one. Suffering is temporary, but the glory of God is eternal. Okay, it's a season. The last one, be renewed. You are not in this fight alone. Okay? Got a nice outline? They'll come up. They'll come up through the text of the sermon. All right. So now we go back to the scripture ones, Jacob, and we'll be on our way. So suffering is a challenge to define, right? I think it is. It's almost easier to just determine what it's not than it is to determine what it is, because it's very subjective, right? I mean, I could say I'm suffering because I don't like mosquitoes and I live in Minnesota. You could say, well, I'm suffering because I made 10% less last year, even though it's more than enough for me to live on. It's sort of a subjective thing, right? It could be, well, I've got aches and pains, so I'm suffering. Or the other person is, well, I've had aches and pains for 20 years, and I'm still okay. It's subjective, right? What I call suffering, you might just call an annoying just fact of life. We just put up with it. Because we're on planet Earth. We're humans, right? It's a challenging topic for us as Christians because it gets into what we think about God, who's good and doesn't want us to suffer. And neither do we want to suffer because we're made in the image of God, right? We talked about this, how it started out really good, right? Last week we talked about being in the garden in paradise, and then it's spoiled, and we want to get back to that. It's been spoiled for a long time, and we want to get back to paradise because we know what it's like. We have a memory, I think, of that. So we don't like this process, this aspect of life called suffering, because we expect it to be better, different than it actually is sometimes. Of course, the other thing is it's not all bad, right? It's part of life. So neither should we shrink from talking about it as Christians, because it happens to come up quite a bit in the Bible. We'll look at that. Nor should we sort of put it off as, well, some people suffer, but if I just get enough pain relief medicine and health insurance and car insurance and sort of get myself set up comfortably, I won't suffer very much. I might get some health problems, but it's a little bit of suffering. You know what I'm saying? We try to build up a lot of barriers so that we can live as comfortably as possible. Yet, suffering can weave its way back in, and does. So, in fact, sometimes the more you have, the more you suffer. How does that work? Okay? The Bible is full of illustrations, biographies of folks who did quite a bit of suffering. It's kind of a downer, if you look at it that way. You could spend a few days reading biographies of people who suffer, who have tremendous amounts of agony, but still cling to the promise that God gives them. promises of God. But it does get better. So we'll start with the book of Job, probably the premier suffering person in the Old Testament. One of the oldest books. So Job chapter 2, verse 9. The tragedy of tragedies. You might know the outline of this story. Job has 10 kids. He's got flocks and herds and all kinds of influence, and he's doing just fine, right? And if you read the first 2 chapters, it's God and Satan and some other folks in heaven kind of looking things over. And God says, well, have you considered my servant Job? Which is not a good thing to hear. If you hear God say it in your name, after that, kind of brace yourself. Because it's sort of like God says, oh, there you go, test him. And that's exactly what happens, okay? He goes from riches to rags, back to riches, but not before losing his family and his health and his friends. So we'll just take a little look at that, because it's 39 chapters. You could, like I said, spend quite a bit of time on it. Because he's tempted right away in the beginning of his trials to answer God from suffering with more suffering. In other words, he gets sort of crushed, and his wife says, well, just punch back. Look at verse 9. Job's wife says to him, are you still maintaining your integrity? In other words, blamelessness or innocence. Are you saying that you had nothing that you did brought this suffering to you? Is kind of what she's saying. Look at her next sentence. Curse God and die. Just give up. God sent you suffering, just send him a blow back and tell him you're done. Verse 10, Job replied, you are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. It's tempting to identify all suffering as merely a wake-up call from God, right? Rather than both a wake-up call and an invitation to learn a lesson that God wants to teach us. I mean, Mrs. Job, whoever she was very emblematic of her people, right? If someone was sick or suffering or poor, well, they had the judgment of God on them. They did something. That's why they're suffering. But Jesus didn't reinforce that, if you notice. In Luke chapter 9, he says, they asked him, well, how come this man was born blind? Who sinned, him or his parents? What did Jesus answer? Neither one. Kind of said suffering is. Try not to look for who did what and why, and this is how I got to where I'm at. Now that can be part of the equation, we know that, right? But that's not the whole picture. Suffering is a wake-up call from God, but it's also a lesson that God wants to teach us, okay? That lesson gets unfolded as you go through scriptures, and what we'll do is fast forward to a writer of the Psalms. We'll get to Psalm 119. It's the biggest psalm, about in the middle of the book, right? Verse 69, because there someone has been through some stuff, learned some things, and come to a conclusion. It says, before I was afflicted, I went astray. But now I obey your word. Look at the first half of that. Before I was afflicted, I went astray. When it's really good, it's easy to stray. When you've got health and wealth, and you've got a good job, and you know what you're up to, it's easy to sort of find your way all over the place. But now it says this, after the affliction, I obey your word. So suffering can be instructive, can it not? It's a skilled teacher, a tool in the hand of God, even transformative. Okay? Job's sort of education in the school of suffering brings him from where he was to where God needed him, to where he could speak into him his truth. And it doesn't happen until chapter 39 at the end, where Job finally says, you're God and I'm not. I guess this was all for your glory. Which is one reason God allows, if you will, suffering. Okay? 2 verses later, Psalm 119:71. See if that one's right. Oh, there it is. It was good for me to be afflicted so that I might learn your decrees. Okay? Affliction can be an educator, can be a tool that God can use, that I might learn your decrees. Because when we try to deny suffering, what happens? Because it's real, it happens, it is. We get the suffering of denying suffering, and then we have the suffering that we deny. Well, we get both. Isn't that how it works? When we diminish it and say, well, it's not so bad, but it is really pretty bad, we're not being honest with ourselves. In other words, the lesson may not come home to us until it comes again and we can learn. Okay. So suffering is a powerful tool if placed only and squarely in the hand of God. But here's where it gets a little tricky. Here's where Christians and people that look at Christians and study our doctrine say, you know, I don't know if that kind of God is, I don't like that image of God. So listen carefully. God doesn't wield the tool to teach us a lesson capriciously. In other words, watch this. Okay? I don't think God does that. There's plenty of suffering without God doing that, right? But once there is suffering, or since there is, God can use it. It's a tricky turn there. Because it's real easy to say, well, God did this and that and this happened, and thanks God, like Job's wife, curse God and die. Do you know people like that? I do. They don't always come to church because they've been spurned or they feel spurned by God. Okay? God can use it. God can use anything, right? So what God would have us learn, I think, is that since there is suffering, and as suffering happens, and sometimes it's a lot, and sometimes it's a little, and sometimes it's you or your neighbor, and it doesn't seem to really have a lot of sense to it, it's a lesson that God can teach. God can use it if we don't go bitter or numb or cold. Okay? Give it over to God. It belongs to Him. Because you belong to Him. Psalm 32 verse 3 says this, when I kept silent and my bones wasted away, through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength was sapped in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. There's a connection between what's in our hearts and what we tell God. It sets us free when we come clean to God and to others. So suffering kind of puts us on God's map. That's point 2 if you're filling in your outline there. We get right with God by confessing our piece of the puzzle, the mess that we're in, our culpability or our fault, because we do have some, right? It can connect us to God, give us perspective, sort of the long view, and see us at a certain point and maybe think about where God might want to take us, rather than feeling like we're stuck and buried and sort of smothered in the dark. Because that's what it can do to us, right? But it can connect us to God. So the early Christians knew about this and wrote about it. The New Testament is filled with all kinds of accounts of suffering that turns into joy. And it's almost like they boast about it. It's almost a little macabre if you really read it carefully, right? Because really all they had to do was survive and preach the gospel until someone caught up with them. It's kind of what happened to all the apostles, right, and disciples. So life is very simple for them. If you're suffering, that means you're doing the right things because the world is after you. Because they hated Jesus, they hate you. So we applaud your suffering. How'd you like that, church? That's how it was. And it really still is that way in a way. Even as comfortable as we have it here, and as protected as we are in this country, it's still that way. If you confess and profess Jesus, there's a little suffering that comes with that. You've got to say no to some things that your friends don't have to say no to if they don't profess Jesus. Okay? But here's point number 3. Suffering can drive you closer to God if you don't let it spoil you, if you don't get burned out, if you don't get bitter. You can say, God, teach me through this. Educate my heart. Misery not only enlarges our capacity for understanding others who go through suffering that we may never go through, but it presses us into God, who really knows suffering really well, right? I mean, the New Testament church didn't know suffering just because they were being chased around. They knew it because they had the master teacher who suffered, who wasn't guilty, who was not blameless, but suffered on their behalf. So the next point is this, and maybe the last point, 4th point. Actually, there's 5, so this is the 4th one. Suffering is temporary. It really is. And it might even be that you suffer to the end of your days, and that was your suffering, and it might have been a bodily suffering, a disease or something, and it ends your life, but it does does end. And then we suffer if we loved you because you're gone. But it did end, right? And at the end of days, all suffering ends for everybody, in Christ or outside of Christ. So it is temporary, even though people and folks have suffered for a long, long time. It's also not your whole life, right? I mean, you can live a pretty decent life and have a little suffering here and a little bit there, but it's not the whole thing. So the Bible wants you to, the Bible teaches that there are better days ahead, that your suffering ends, that when your suffering comes to an end, if it isn't by the end of your life, it's by the end of life itself, and it gets better. Paul knew that, and he taught that to the church at Corinth, and if you turn to chapter 4, you can see him lay that out. And this is what I think is just absolutely sort of stunning. If you know Paul's life at all, how he was sort of shipwrecked, beaten with rods, you can read it in the book of Acts. This is what he says about suffering in 2 Corinthians 4. I'll start at 17 and then we'll go to 16. He calls it a light, momentary affliction. Is it light to be whipped, to be shipwrecked, to be flogged 5 times, arrested? That's what he calls it. Verse 17 of 2 Corinthians 4. Our light, momentary affliction, troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. It's sort of like a paper clip compared to an anvil, or a feather compared to an elephant. Okay? Light. I wouldn't call it light. I'd say that was pretty heavy, but I wasn't Paul. Therefore, do not lose heart, verse 16. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, suffering, but what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. So it's a temporary condition, but the glory of God is eternal. Point 5. Okay. Suffering's for a season, but the splendor of God is the everlasting reality for all those who receive Jesus Christ by faith today, in order that you would secure his presence with you, with God tomorrow and forever. Paul taught what we easily overlook, right? He was God's prophet. He read God's prophets like Isaiah. He quoted Isaiah in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 7, which says, we declare God's wisdom a mystery that has been hidden from the beginning of time, that God designed for our glory before time began. Verse 8, none of the rulers of this age understood it. For if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. However, as it is written, and this is where he quotes Isaiah, what no eye has seen and what no ear has heard and what no human mind has conceived, the things that God has prepared for those who love him. These are those things God has revealed to us by his Spirit. So we're not going to figure this thing out, are we? Where all suffering comes from, how we get through it. I mean, we know it's there. The word mystery can apply. Because we only get so far in our thinking, and we get stuck. And Paul uncovers that for us and just says, well, there it is, from the beginning of time. This is one thing we're probably not going to figure out. But we can get through it. Okay? If we acknowledge that God will use it and does use it for his glory, that's the beginning, right? That can help a lot, right? If it's a tool in God's hand and God uses it, it's okay. Even if it hurts, because it does hurt. Even though this human condition is something we all deal with, it can drive us as well closer to God. And learn what lifelong Christ followers already know and begin to understand before their years are done. And it's never complete, but you begin to understand it, this mystery, that we are being renewed day by day, even as we suffer, because nothing is beyond God's capacity to understand or to empathize with, because our God knows suffering. His Son was pierced in his hand and his side so that we might have life eternal. So be renewed, Paul would remind us, as he reminded those first Christians, because you know that you live between the murky past and a glorious future. That's just exactly where we're at. You have the body of Christ with you to support you. You do not fight this fight alone. Okay? You're part of a church, of a body that asks you to tell us and each other what you're suffering from. It's not good advertising for a club, by the way, but it works. Bring us your pathologies, your maladies, your shortcomings, your diseases. Tell us. Go through the whole thing, because we got a list as well, and together we'll share them, and then we'll say, boy, this is something God can use. It's a pretty good picture of the church, isn't it? We'll bring it all to Jesus. So we can trade our sorrows for joy, the joy of the Lord. Our sickness for our pain for goodness and a promise. It's more than just a wish. It's a place to start, and these people are people to start with. These people of God, this family of God, this church you're a part of. There's a lot of resumes of suffering sitting around you tonight, and if you share a little bit of yours, they'll share a little bit of theirs, and together we can say, oh, that's not so bad. Boy, you got through that. It's meant to be shared, not kept secret. Have you done so? Have you shared it with another Christian, what you're going through? About 20 years ago, it was about this time of year, a little later, end of the school year, there was a young man going to his last day of high school. He polished his two-door black Chevy sedan, nice Impala. Went down the road from the farm place they lived on to the school. He'd probably been on 1,000 times. Had a squirt gun in the trunk because after school they were going to have a giant squirt gun war. And as the day proceeded, early that morning, something happened where there was an accident with another car, and that student was killed as a senior on his last day. And the community was just sort of in shock for weeks. That ended the school year. Then the summer began with the grief and the pain, and the family was well known, and several communities together that felt this loss. And of course we had a funeral, and we talked, and we tried to process this, and there were a bunch of folks in church I was serving trying to figure this out. There were a lot of his cousins and people that knew him well and loved him. And they were a family that kind of seemed to have it together, and they couldn't figure this out. Who could, right? We finally came to the thing where we came to it and said, we don't know the answer. And we weren't so, trite to say, well, it's a mystery. That didn't seem quite right. We just said, we don't know why Josh was killed. But we know who has the answers. So we turned to him. And not everybody figured it out right away, or even months, or maybe even years later. And I would say that it still hurts, right? And it will. That's kind of life. We don't have all the answers, but we do have the answerer, the one who gives the answers. And that person's name is Jesus Christ. Your Savior and Lord, who's been there, done that, and wants you to join him. Will you? Amen.
We're going to sing together the gospel song a couple times. Maybe there's some young folk who would show us the actions, because it's just helpful. We'll be seated. Thank you, Stina, for joining me. They're not going to join us. If there's anybody else who knows them, you could join these three. We're going to sing them through a couple times. We'll stay seated so that you can see the actions once, and then after we've done it once, you can stand and join the action. Why don't can you guys go up on the stage thing? I know that's hard for everybody.
On the
Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you that suffering isn't just wild, isn't just a killer, but Father, you can use it. You can teach us, draw us close to you. Father, that through it, Lord, we can grow and give witness. Father, thank you that you're a God who doesn't just let suffering stand, but that you end it and that you usher in, Lord, everlasting life, where no tear, no pain, no crying, but you wipe them all and lift us for eternity. We're thankful, Father, for who you are. And we ask now that we would be able to share one another's burdens and that we could suffer together, encouraging one another, praying over each other, and for each other, speaking your words of promise into each other's lives, because we can't do this alone. And you have not created us to be alone, but you've placed us in a community of faith. So teach us to bear each other's burdens and to suffer together for your glory, to give witness to your holy name. And all God's people say, Amen. We sing one more song of praise. The mystery of the cross I cannot comprehend. Agony of Calvary. You, the perfect Holy One, crushed your Son, who drank the bitter gall reserved for me. Your blood has washed away my sin. Jesus, thank you. The Father's wrath completely satisfied. Jesus, thank you. Once your enemy, now seated at your table. Jesus, thank you. By your perfect sacrifice, I've been brought near. Your enemy, you made your friend, pouring out the riches of your glorious grace. Your mercy and your kindness don't know end. Your blood has washed away my sin. Jesus, thank you. Father's wrath completely satisfied. Jesus, thank you. Once your enemy, now seated at your table. Jesus, thank you. Lover of my soul, I want to live for you. and keep you.
See, Dave, you had an announcement. You asked earlier about an announcement, and you did forget one. And I want to make sure that everybody knows about that. What it is that there's Bible study right after church, right after worship over in, I think, where does Heidi meet over here?
Yep.
And they have coffee, and actually, you may want to go because coffee mugs, and actually, I'd like to invite my wife up here to get one of these because you can be seated. This will take a while. Kevin is not the only one turning another year older. You want a hat flip? I need some help. Okay, there's 10 of these cups, and there's 5 kisses in each cup, so it's a loving cup. No. So look under your seats. If you have a cup and you want to keep it, you've got to come up with 5 things, 5 little kisses or compliments for Bonnie, because she turns 50 at midnight.
Tomorrow to you. Happy birthday tomorrow to you. Happy birthday, dear Bonnie. Happy birthday to you.
So as you go, look under your chair. If you have one of these cups, you want to keep it. You got to say 5 nice things to Bonnie, and then you can keep it. And then there's more for the rest of us here. So
happy birthday, Bonnie.
Yeah.
We'll bless you with compliments.
Thank you.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord will look upon you with favor and grant you his peace. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace and serve the Lord. Give Bonnie some love.